What are the implications then, in your view, about the Abraham Accords? You know, several of the countries that have been attacked are the ones that signed up to the Abraham Accords, led by Bahrain, I think initially. Morocco, of course, hasn't been attacked, but you've got the UAE's in there. Um, what are the implications for what was seen to be one of the first sort of true advances of the, or real advances, or lasting advances of that first Trump administration? The
Mm.
implications for the Abraham
Yeah, it's a
Accords.
really good question. It's a really good question. I've been wondering that too. What will happen in the wash up to this conflict, to the Abraham Accords, which is really in the goal for UAE and Bahrain enterprise?
Hmm.
Uh, will they stay in those agreements? I think they probably will. I think there will be a doubling down, if anything, on the Abraham Accords, just based on this view that Iran has been out of line in this conflict. And
Hmm.
the Gulf states have been very outspoken in their criticism, and they've become increasingly so over the past 6 weeks. I mean, Anwar Gargash, who's one of the top diplomatic advisors in the UAE, and a real elder statesman there, he said right at the start of the war, I think on the first day, your war is not with your neighbours. And the tone has only increased since then, and they've got to the point where were issuing joint statements, the Gulf states really going very hard
Mm-hmm.
against Iran. And there was also that UN Security Council resolution early on in the war, 2817, which Bahrain, I think, holds the
Yeah.
presidency at the moment in the UN Security Council. And they put forward this resolution condemning the quote unquote egregious attacks by Iran. And remarkably, resolution was adopted. And as Robert will know, it's difficult to get anything through this UN Security Council these days. But China and Russia let that one through, interestingly. So, look, for all that, to come back to that original question about the Abraham Accords, I think my view, I think, is that Bahrain and the UAE will probably stay in. The question is whether Saudi Arabia can be
Yeah.
tempted to join the Abraham Accords. Because if you go back to pre-October 7th, there was some speculation that they might join and that they might normalize relations with Israel. Then October 7th came, and that very much was off the table. This war, maybe it resets things a little bit and resets uh, perhaps the calculations. I think the Gulf states themselves don't know exactly at this point what they will do. Uh, I think everyone at the moment is focused on this initial crisis management phase, and once they get through that, once the Strait of Hormuz is open again, and there is some deal done, which seems like it is in the offing, as Robert was saying, I think all sides really want to get out of this now, and I think that's why there is some progress being made. There've been an awful lot of losers in this conflict in
Yes.
the Middle East and all around the world, and the United States and Iran and I think Israel have realized that this actually hasn't worked, this conflict, and that's what's really pushed them to the negotiating table. So I think a deal will be done. The question is what the terms are, but some kind of deal will be done. But then I think there will be this great reassessment across the Middle East, and who's going to get along with whom. Uh,
Hmm.
what is the future of the Abraham Accords? Uh, Things like the Strait of Hormuz generally. I mean, if this is a point of vulnerability, the Gulf states have got large sums of money. Uh, could they be put to use to create more pipelines
Yes, I
that
can
can
see a
carry
pipeline going straight
greater
across to
quantities of
Oman.
oil?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, can more pipelines be built, greater capacity, because the ones that do exist just simply don't have the capacity. Can there be some de-risking done uh, in that area? So I think there will be a lot of reassessments going on, just ranging from the economics to the politics, uh, and to the geopolitics. And I just think we just don't know really where things will end up. And I honestly believe I don't think the leaderships in all of these countries necessarily know exactly where they'll end up on all of these questions
And
as well, because there's
yeah,
just been so much focus, I think, on this initial crisis management phase.
Yeah, and Jeffrey, not to bring you too much just back to a local issue, but you know your PhD is fascinating on the New Zealand relationship with these countries. I noticed also it was the 21st century because I once went to Bahrain because New Zealand was building a large refrigerated plant there, and it was really the first time, in a sense. I think it was Muldoon actually who had, or I forget, maybe it was Hugh Templeton, possibly the trade minister at the time, sort of recognised the possibilities of the Gulf at that point. What's the New Zealand implication of all of this? From, you know, what influence do we have there, if any?
Yeah, I think a lot of listeners will be perhaps surprised to just hear how close actually New Zealand is with the Gulf states, and particularly at the moment the UAE. Christopher Luxon actually had a phone call with Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the president of the UAE, on the 4th of March. Now you just think about that. The war began, what, the 28th of February. By the 4th of March, he was talking with New Zealand's Prime Minister. And he talked to Christopher Luxon before he talked with the president of Indonesia, for example, or the leaders of the Netherlands, Romania, much bigger states. And New Zealand is actually really focused on the Gulf, particularly during this government since 2023, but really over the last 20 years. And my research showed that there have been more than 60 visits by New Zealand ministers to the Gulf states since 2001. And there have been at least 30 visits that I could find in the other direction. And the number's only gone up since I tallied up those figures. So it's been a relationship, I think, built on trade, but it's expanded to security. And that was what my thesis showed, that there was a greater security component that developed over the 25 years, the generation that I looked at, in the wake of 9/11, and the fact that New Zealand became involved in more and more multilateral military deployments in the Middle East. And New Zealand and the Gulf just were natural partners in a sense, because New Zealand needed bases and somewhere to operate out of. But as I said, come back that trade side, I mean, New Zealand's main exports, dairy, meat, fruit, and for the Gulf states, that is all existential stuff. It's not just nice to haves, it's food security for them, and that's the prism through which they look at New Zealand's exports or imports from their perspective from New Zealand. The Gulf states have no natural rivers. They can't produce a lot on their own, and they absolutely need food. And so that's why they have been particularly interested in what New Zealand produces. So it's actually been a very, I think, important relationship that New Zealand has developed. And the Gulf states are now New Zealand's 6th biggest export market, which is quite incredible, and how that has developed. More than $3 billion in exports to the Gulf every year.
Much more than a controversial fridge in Bahrain. Jeffrey, thank you so much for that, and Robert, thank you for this, and we'll give him an A+. I don't know whether you still do that kind of thing. I'm sure you've
always an A+.
You're always an A+.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
Thank you so much, both of you. It's lovely to have you on, and Jeff, thanks so much, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for coming on.